In 2005, police officer Quinn Witherspoon was shot to death as he napped on the couch. After his wife was arrested, she found an unlikely ally in her pleas of innocence, her husband's entire family. I'm Charlie Worrell,
And I'm Eric Carter Lundeen.
and this is Crime Lines and Consequences. Welcome, Eric, to Crime Lines and Consequences, and to all our listeners, welcome to the show. So, how are you, Eric?
I'm doing good. How are you, Charlie?
I'm good, just busy living life with all these children. What have you been up to?
Working. Pretty
I know.
much. Yeah, that's pretty much my life. Has it warmed up there at all yet?
It has. We actually went out with we bought the boys the most ridiculous Christmas gift. We got them these like mini go-karts that they sit on and they ride around. They're really cool, but we bought them in for Christmas in Kansas City. So
Mm.
it was warm enough and we had no snow on the ground like 2 days ago. So I mean they had them for almost a month and couldn't ride them.
I bet they
It
had a
was
good time, though.
Yeah, we should have gotten them for like Easter or something. But
Birthday or something.
yeah, I have the funniest videos of them, and my boys are so different. One of them is super cautious and the other is like not at
Wild.
all.
Yeah.
So they're like going down a hill and my 10-year-old's like slowing it down with his feet and my 6-year-old just zips by him screaming and then like spins out at the bottom of the hill. The whole thing was hilarious.
Amazing. Well, I think we've had enough of the small talk. We can leave all that rambling for Patreon, which we just recorded an episode of that. So go to patreon.com/crime lines and consequences if you want to check it out, or subscribe on Apple subscriptions. Let's get into the case, Charlie.
Yeah, so this case is one that I first heard about on the TV show Snapped, and that's actually what our small talk was about because Eric was on
Mhm.
Snapped. And so if you want to hear about his experience with that, that's on our Patreon or Apple subscription feed. But let's go ahead and get into this case. We're going to start with Quinn Witherspoon. He was born in November of 1970 in Mooresville, North Carolina, which is about an hour north of Charlotte. When Quinn was 19, he met 17-year-old Misty Keller, who had also grown up in Mooresville. They were both hanging out with friends one night, they met, and soon enough they were dating. And because they were so young when they met, as young love can be, the relationship was on and off again.
Mhm. Yeah, so what was your young love life experience like?
I got married at 19, if that tells you anything. It was intense.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
still married to that person, by the way.
Good for you. Good for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, we we stuck together and made all of our poor life decisions together for many, many years.
I got married at 21 and I am still no longer married to that person. You thought I was gonna say I was still married to them, but I'm not. I have a husband now. So,
Yeah, a kind of a big switch up there.
yeah, yeah. But I did get married very young, so I definitely
Yeah.
understand that that can be a challenge,
Mhm.
especially when you are first starting out in life. You really don't have a lot to your name.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you really when you're starting out, you lack the life experience and a lot of times the emotional intelligence to see through the ups and downs. So, you get in a fight and you think, "We have to break up. This
Yeah.
isn't working." And then as you mature, you realize that you can work through things. And so that's kinda what happened with Quinn and Misty because they were dating for 4 years. Now, like I said, it was on and off again, but it was mostly on. It's not like they broke up constantly. And they got married in 1994. Quinn has been described as the kind and helpful kind of person.
Yeah, I read that he was the type of guy who just dropped whatever he was doing to help somebody if they needed help. And or even if they just needed something done, he would go and go help them out.
Yeah, and I think that really feeds into, like, his career aspirations as well, because since he was, like, a little boy, Quinn always wanted to become a police officer.
Mm.
So, after he finished his criminal justice degree, about a year or so after he and Misty had married, he joined the police force in a nearby city of Concord. And I noted in my notes how to say that because I grew up in the Northeast and The capital of New Hampshire is spelled the same way, but it's pronounced Concord there. People say Concord, New Hampshire. It's pronounced Concord, and everywhere else in the entire country, they say Concord.
Right.
So I had to make a note on how to say it so nobody can come for me for a mispronunciation. Now, Misty has been described by people as just friendly and upbeat, and between her and Quinn, they really did seem like a great pair. They weren't known for fighting all the time or anything like that. In 1998, they had a daughter together, and again, they've been described as just fantastic parents who work together to take care of their children. Misty worked at a factory nearby while Quinn was just excelling as a police officer. When their daughter was about 3, they then had twins, and around that same time, Quinn was promoted to a canine officer, and he was paired with a very adorable dog named Tank. As is usual when not on duty, Tank would live with the family.
I love that you put a picture of this dog here because it is making my whole week. This dog is so cute. I just want to hug him. He
I
looks like a
know
sweetheart.
I know, like, he's trained to attack, and his name is Tank, but he just looks like a very good boy.
He's a good boy. He's the best boy.
I will tell you, when I sent notes over to Eric, this is the sole picture I included was of the dog, if that tells you anything about the 2 of us.
And if you're a listener and you want to know what Tank looks like, we're going to go ahead and post this picture on our Instagram and our Facebook so that you can see
Yes.
it yourself. And if you want to DM us, slide in our DMs and send us dog pics. We love dogs.
We always take dog pictures. That's our currency.
Mhm.
And obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, I will have hopefully remembered to edit in the picture. So Quinn gets this promotion,
Mm.
and they have 3 little kids. I mean, I can't even imagine, even though I did have many little kids myself. 3 under 3 is a lot.
Yeah.
They decided it just made more financial sense for Misty to start being a stay-at-home mom. So, like, if I think about the daycare costs for 1 toddler and 2 infants, I feel like I should quit my job.
It is so expensive.
So
Oh my God.
expensive. Now, with this promotion, they ended up buying a bigger house in a nice neighborhood. And as a bonus, this house was right next door to Quinn's parents, which I imagine helped so much with all these little kids around.
That promotion must have been pretty great for them to be able to afford for Missy to stay home and buy a bigger house. I mean, you're not saving that much money on daycare.
That would be correct. Eric's math is a little bit better than the math here. There were a few issues. The promotion obviously was a step up for sure, but we're talking about adding 2 kids, dropping Misty's income, and adding a much more expensive house. And it really wasn't that big of a step up. So Quinn would take overtime whenever he could get it. He moonlighted as a security guard. On his days off, he would help a family member do landscaping work, pretty much anything to bring in just a little bit more money. And Misty tried to do what she could as well to bring in this extra income. She did what a lot of stay-at-home moms end up kind of getting into, and it's those like direct sales, multi-level marketing
Mm.
type businesses, which according to income disclosures, 99% of people in them do not make any money.
Hashtag boss babe.
So I definitely, if you're looking to get into those, um, do some
Don't.
homework on them, and or don't do it.
Yeah.
And she also would clean houses, and eventually she got hired to do custodial work at their church.
Charlie, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I have very strong feelings about MLMs.
I do too. I always feel I'm kind of at 2 minds with it. I am absolutely against MLMs. I do not think they should even be legal.
Mhm.
And that is my opinion. I know a lot of people do them, and I never feel like the people doing them, like, at the bottom rung are ever the problem, because they're
No,
always just looking to take care of their families,
no.
they're not trying, most of them are not trying to be millionaires. They just wanna make enough money while staying at home, and the pressure that's put on them and knowing they're not gonna make money, even though they're doing a lot of work. I mean, if it works for somebody and that's how you're making your money, just think about how you're making that money. Like
Mhm.
who you're taking that money from. If you're
Yeah.
making passive income from someone else working, just think about it. So anyway, yeah. we'll
Rant over.
maybe we'll do an MLM episode if we ever feel like really up to just lighting everything on fire. But at this point, the money that was coming in just was not enough. And also, like a lot of young families, and again, I don't judge because I know Lars and I did this early on. We overextended ourselves,
Mhm.
and they certainly did here. Now, we never did it to this degree, but they got a house that was at the top of what they could afford. But then they decided to get a nice car. Now, we were driving beaters when we were starting out. They financed a nicer car than they could comfortably afford. So they were making these payments. Then they decided to finance a camper. Now, there's
Wow.
something Lars and I have definitely tried to do with our kids, our adult kids, to tell them, like, when they start out, they're not going to have all those things that we have now. When we started out, we didn't have a new car, we didn't have a big house, we didn't have money for vacations or anything like that. So they can't expect to step from our house into their own and have those things. They kind of have to start at the bottom, and obviously we're helping them along the way, but I don't want them to fall into that cycle of debt that
Yeah.
happens when you think you should have everything your parents worked 25 years for.
Yeah, I think I sent you that message that I sent to my son when he turned 18, where I told him to just avoid debt at all costs because it is a huge trap. And I really
Yeah.
wish that somebody would have told me that when I was his age. I think it's
Mhm.
it's an important lesson to learn early on because it's so easy to get sucked into that and then not be able to get out.
It's really hard, and it's one of those things that our kids didn't see us struggle with because by the time they were paying attention to us, we had kinda righted the ship a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like, if they I'm like, if you could just imagine, like, my oldest son's first Christmas, we just wrapped hand-me-down toys that a friend had given us, and that was his, like, entire Christmas. Now, he is, like, 9 months old. He doesn't really care, but, like, a lot of people go all out for baby's first Christmas. We couldn't have done that even if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So he doesn't see that. He doesn't see that part of the beginning because by the time he was paying attention and noticed little things, we were past that.
Right.
So it's definitely one of those things that's kind of hard to instill because they also want these things and
Mhm.
sometimes they can be impulsive with it.
Absolutely.
I could talk about the stress of transitioning children into adults all day, along with MLMs. Maybe we need a side podcast for all this.
I love it.
But to get a little bit more into their finances, like there were also issues with like Misty's spending to the degree that it feels like it might have been compulsive.
Mhm.
So she would like bargain shop groceries, clipping coupons, shopping the ads, and getting stuff on clearance. But then she'd also go and buy clothing she didn't need and makeup she didn't really need. And I'm not talking like, you grab an extra shirt at Target or you grab too many to go coffees. I mean, she was spending a lot more into that compulsive level.
Yeah, it's a dangerous cycle to get into, and it's very difficult to get out of when
Mhm.
you start going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So that will bring us to September 13th, 2005. They're 11 years into their marriage, and Misty and Quinn were preparing to go on a camping trip that they were taking the next day, and they were going with Quinn's family. After Quinn dropped their oldest child off at school, he went home to help Misty finish packing stuff up and getting ready for the trip. They had really been looking forward to this camping trip because camping was just about the only vacation they could afford at this point with their level of debt, and honestly, the money they owed on the camper itself, they might as well get their money's worth out of it. Quinn had worked the night before this, so he was kind of running on empty that morning. So when the twins went down for their nap, Quinn went and laid on the living room sofa to take a nap himself before it was then time to get up and go do the school pickup and the evening routine. So it was 1:36 while Quinn was sleeping that Misty called the power company. And we have this exact time because of phone records. At that time, Misty and Quinn owed nearly $900 on their electric bill.
Wow.
Obviously, most of it was arrears and probably late fees. And the electric company in my area, they don't mess with their money. Getting $900 behind here, they often will cut you off before that.
Hmm.
And that was basically why Misty was calling, is that morning they got that final notice in the mail that their power was going to be turned off the next day if they didn't pay. So Misty was calling just to get an extension to buy some time before the shut off.
Which is something that I've definitely done in my younger years when I was struggling for money. You call them. I think our listeners may know the drill if they've been through this. You call them, you cry maybe a little bit, and then promise that you're going to pay. And most of the time, they do extend the deadline, but I don't know if that's going to work when you're $900 behind.
Yeah, and then usually it's like, "No, but we get paid on Friday and we'll have the money," and I mean, sometimes they'll take a lower payment right then to then
Hmm.
extend the rest, and that's probably how it turned out the first time Misty called. I don't think this was the first time. She kind of used up the power company's very minimal goodwill already. They were not going to take a partial payment, a payment plan, they weren't gonna move the due date, nothing. If the bill wasn't paid that day, it was going to be turned off the next. Because Misty called the electric company while Quinn was sleeping, I am going to assume that that's on purpose, that this latest financial crisis was something she was keeping under wraps, and it wasn't going to work. I mean, he would notice when their electricity got turned off, or if they had to go ask his parents for money, or if they had to cancel their camping trip to save money to then pay for bills. Now, what happened next? We have two versions. Both of them come from Misty, and they both start the same way. After she got off the phone with the power company, she was upset, obviously, and she decided to just keep packing for the camping trip while she thought about what to do. She went into the bathroom to look for some lotion to pack, and while she was reaching into a basket, she knocked Quinn's service weapon to the floor. It sounds like he had taken off his entire belt with the gun still in the holster and put it on a shelf, and then the belt got knocked over and the gun fell out. So, Eric, do you want to continue with story number one for us?
Sure. The first story that Misty told police was that the gun fell out of the holster when it hit the floor. She was worried that the drop to the floor might have damaged the gun in some way, so she carried it to Quinn where he was sleeping so that he could look it over before she put it back. As she walked across the room, she slipped on a children's book that was left on the floor, stumbled, fell into Quinn, and somehow pulled the trigger, shooting Quinn in the back of his head.
Misty said she immediately called 911 and said that they needed to get out there quickly, and she explained that she fell while holding a gun and accidentally shot her husband. That call was logged at 2:08. When first responders arrived, it was too late to save Quinn. He was already dead. He probably died almost immediately. The police initially were taking Misty's story at face value, that this was an accident. But they noticed something odd almost right away. Quinn was lying on the couch. He was on his stomach with his arms crossed under a pillow, and his head was on top of the pillow. So if you can picture that. And his face was turned towards the back of the couch. It looked exactly as though he had been napping when he was shot, except they could not find the shell casing. His gun was right ejecting, so they assumed the shell casing would be down towards his feet based on where Misty said she was when the gun went off. It wasn't until they moved his body that they found the shell casing, and it was up by the pillow, which is not where it would have landed, according to Misty's initial story. So Misty went down to the station to give a full statement that afternoon while the family watched the kids. And after she repeated the same story about slipping on the book, she was allowed to be sent home. Now, Quinn was an officer not in this city of Mooresville, but in a neighboring city. However, officers in an area will all know each other. And he and Misty both grew up there, so everybody knew everybody. And while Misty's story didn't 100% align with the evidence, they didn't see anything glaringly obvious that her story was off, which is why they let her go home and they released the house as a crime scene that very day. The family was able to go in and start cleaning the house, and that included disposing of the couch. I imagine that was like the first thing that pulled out of there. I would too. However, that meant that the couch was gone in the event the investigators wanted to come back in for anything.
Hmm.
It wasn't until Misty left the station that the investigators start running down the case, talking it out between themselves, and little doubts started to surface. Like, what was up with the shell casing being on the left and not the right? The angle of the shot didn't really make it seem like his head was positioned the way they found it. And then, I mean, really, what were the odds that the gun would accidentally go off and hit Quinn right in the back of the head, somewhere that was immediately fatal? What were the odds that if she wasn't pointing it at him, that it would have gone off that way?
Yeah, I don't know. That's wild. Something else that they noticed was something that I thought about as soon as you said it earlier. How could a trained and like conscientious police officer leave a loaded gun with the safety off in the bathroom where it could be knocked over by his kids? Especially because they were so young.
Yeah, 100%. So they went back to the beginning, which was that 911 call, and they noticed that Misty didn't open with saying she needed help. She she kind of said, "I need you to get out here," but then she gave her story about tripping and falling first, and then said she shot her husband. And she told the police that while she was on the phone with 911 that she had stayed with Quinn until police arrived. She was trying to render some type of first aid, putting pressure on his wound to try to stop the bleeding, but they could hear noise in the background of the call that sounded like someone was moving around and like cabinet doors were opening and closing. Something they wouldn't expect to hear if she was sitting next to Quinn holding his wound. With all of these concerns in mind, the next day they had Misty walk through a reenactment of what happened at the house, and she allowed them to video it. And they watched her try to walk through what happened. That just confirmed all of their doubts. Not only did she struggle to reenact the sequence of what happened, she just could not do it in a way that made the trigger pull make sense. How did her finger get into the trigger guard and pull hard enough for the gun to just go off if she said she was just carrying it? In the investigators' minds, no one with even a minimal understanding of guns would walk around with their finger in the trigger or on the trigger unless they were planning to shoot. Strangely to me, Quinn's family seemed to have no suspicions at all, or at least not the majority of them. They didn't. They rallied around Misty and, of course, the kids. At this point, the police didn't have anything except suspicion to go on. They certainly didn't have a motive. Quinn and Misty were known to be happy together. They were devoted parents who went on regular dates, and neither of them were having an affair.
So, police talked to a friend of Misty's who said that there were some rumors running around that Misty had gotten into trouble with money at the church a year before. Because the church chose to deal with it privately, though, there was no police report about it. So that's when the investigators went to the pastor of the church to discuss it.
So, what happened was when their oldest child went to school, Misty was looking for more steady work outside the home, but something that would be flexible enough that she wouldn't have to get daycare for her twins. And the family were members of the Whitman Park Baptist Church, and that's the church Quinn had grown up in. So his whole family went there, and it was a fairly small church. They only had about 60 to 70 members, very tight knit. Everyone was either related to the Witherspoon family or they were friends with them. Misty was hired for a couple $100s a month to clean the church. Quinn and his dad were both deacons in this church, and Quinn got elected to be the treasurer. But because he worked so much, Misty became his assistant, and they gave her the power to sign checks.
This feels dangerous. Giving a person who potentially has a compulsive shopping habit the power to sign over checks from a church's bank account doesn't seem like a good plan to me.
It went exactly how you would expect. Suddenly, Misty and Quinn, who had been struggling financially, started doing better, even though the cleaning job was just a couple $100 more per month. It was about a year after Quinn took over treasurer duties in September of 2004 that the pastor started noticing some discrepancies in the books. Eventually, they had like basically a full accounting audit thing looked at, and it appears that it was roughly 20 to $28,000 that were missing.
Wow.
It turned out Misty had been using the church funds to pay her household bills for a good part of that year. Quinn hadn't noticed because Misty handled the finances, and he wouldn't have noticed a sudden increase in income like that. Now, honestly, I handle all the finances in my household too. I could have some side hustle bringing in millions of dollars and Lars would have no idea.
You should do it.
I should Yeah, well, as soon as I can get it done, I'll get it done. I'll become an influencer and make all that money. But truthfully, between their debt and Misty's shopping habit, it's this added amount may not have really even seemed like a noticeable amount in Quinn's day-to-day life because it was being spent as soon as it was coming in.
Mm.
Now, the church, rather than go to the police, they decided to just go ahead and handle it privately with the family. So, as long as the family could pay back the money, they would let it go. So, Quinn ended up cashing out some of his retirement savings to pay a chunk back, and I think his parents may have also helped.
I think in this case, there really is a question about how much Quinn knew about their financial situation before the embezzlement came to light. According to his family, he knew things were bad and it wasn't hidden from him. We know Quinn had gone to his captain to borrow money to make a mortgage payment, so he knew they were having financial problems, but it's hard to imagine that he knew about the embezzlement ahead of time.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem like he knew about it. He also didn't seem to know about all of the debt. About 6 months after the embezzling was uncovered, he went to his credit union to discuss his credit card account. They sat him down and they went over his credit report. And on there were credit cards he didn't even know existed. Misty had opened them without his knowledge. In an attempt to stop this flow of money that they didn't have, he did have Misty taken off all of the cards and he reduced the spending limit on them.
Credit cards are so sneaky. Like they can lull you into this false sense of security and you can overspend before you even know that you've done it. It's really can catch up to you very fast. And all of this is making me wonder if this is an addiction for her.
Yeah. I do wonder about when it's like gambling or a gambling addiction, a sex addiction, a shopping addiction, a spending addiction. These are more like compulsive behaviors, and it definitely looks like that's what it was because it seems like no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, she just was not able on her own to stop it, and it would have been good if she was honest about it because they may have been able to get her some type of help, some type of counseling. I mean, I know they're religious and there are a lot of Christian therapists out there, and someone may have been able to help her. I think the real issue here, as far as the marriage went, was the dishonesty in what she was doing. A friend of hers would later say that Misty would turn off the ringer on the phone and carry it around with her all day so that Quinn wouldn't catch on to how often collector calls came in.
So even after getting busted, embezzling thousands of dollars from the church, that would have been a wake up call to most people, I
Mhm.
think. And then Quinn going to the credit union and, cutting her spending and taking her off the credit cards. She's still trying to hide things from him, even though all of this other stuff had already come to light.
Yeah, exactly, and as we see, she was trying to hide that electric bill from him as well. So that's all the backdrop that led up to September 13th, 2005. It was 1 year after the embezzlement came out that Quinn was shot, and it was just minutes after she found out about the electric company about to turn the power off for months' worth of unpaid bills that Quinn likely didn't know about. So the police took the next logical step when they're looking at a financial motive, and they checked out Quinn's life insurance. Between his life insurance, survivor's benefits for her and the kids, and what was left in Quinn's 401k, Misty was due to collect nearly $200,000. So we have a story that doesn't make sense, a woman deeply in debt and about to have her husband yet again find out that she had been hiding something from him. And now we have a large insurance payout that would have bailed her out of all of this. They had Misty go ahead and sit down to make a written statement, and they interviewed her 2 more times. The second interview occurred on October 3rd. It lasted about 3 hours, and Misty was told that at this point that they were about to wrap up their investigation and they just had a few more questions for her. And they started off just by asking her more about herself, like her life growing up, her life with Quinn, that sort of thing.
They called it rapport building in a legal brief, which I imagine is a tool that's used to disarm and make an interviewee feel comfortable and at ease so that they are more inclined to answer their questions honestly.
Yeah, and it seems like it was working a little bit because she was willing to sit and talk with them. She definitely didn't feel that they were interrogating her at this point.
Mm.
They led up to the day of Quinn's shooting, and Misty more or less gave the same story. There were a few details that were off, but nothing alarming. The lead investigator did bring up some of the inconsistencies, like how there was no footprint on that book she said she stepped on and slipped. They also showed Misty some of the crime scene photos to point out inconsistencies with his head placement and the blood flow, and also a concern that the blood looked more dry than they would have expected had she called the police right away, like she claimed. And then they played her the full audio of her 911 call, which included 15 seconds with no one talking. And it's during that 15 seconds that you can hear the doors being open, things falling on the floor. And now, obviously, the police are wondering if this was the point when Misty started staging the bathroom to make it look like Quinn's gun fell to the floor.
Wow, they're really just laying out all of their suspicions on the table for her.
Yeah, and Misty continued to insist that she did not shoot Quinn on purpose. She did ask at one point if she needed a lawyer, and she was told she was free to go and not under arrest. So she asked if she could leave and go home to her children who were staying with Quinn's parents at this point. And she was told as she left that they needed her to fill in some of the blanks of what they were talking about, and would she be willing to come in for another interview to discuss all of these inconsistencies? And she said yes. Now, I have to say, if you have to ask the police if you need a lawyer, you need a lawyer.
Mhm.
So Misty came back just 2 days later on October 5th, and this is where we get her second story.
After the police already told her everything that was wrong with her first story, I wonder if they did that on purpose just to see how she would change her statement to make it try to fit with all the objections that they were bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, if that was their intent, they definitely got what they were looking for, because the start of the story, like I said before, was the same. She was upset about the bills, then upset she was going to have to tell Quinn about the camping trip not happening because they needed the money, on and on. So she goes to the bathroom for the lotion, knocks the gun down, except this time she said she wasn't worried that the gun was damaged. She looked at the gun and she saw it as a sign that this was her way out of this entire mess. And by that, she meant suicide. She said she picked up the gun and she went out to sit on the porch swing, thinking about the situation she was in. And then she got up and went to the workshop in the back of the house. And she thought she was going to shoot herself in there because then, Quinn and the twins were less likely to hear and the kids wouldn't see anything. And she was trying to build up the nerve to take her own life when Quinn's canine dog, Tank, came up to her and started nudging her. So she got up and she went back to the porch swing, but Tank was being very persistent. So that's when she decided to go back into the house. When she was inside, Misty said she was standing behind the couch where Quinn was sleeping, trying to decide what to do. She said she alternated between putting the gun to her head and then praying. She said she was thinking more and more about this financial hole they were in.
In fairness to Misty, I can see how she felt incredibly distraught about all of this. She just got, within a year, just got caught embezzling money. She had all those credit cards that Quinn didn't know about. And then finding out that she was hiding all these financial issues from him again could have been the last straw for their relationship. It could have caused a huge rift between them. She wasn't just facing her power being turned off, but possibly a divorce. And then with that comes a custody battle, which is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I've been through one. But since Quinn was the one who was shot, this was clearly more complicated than just contemplating suicide.
Right. She's contemplating suicide, yet she is the one still alive. So, as for how the gun got from pointing to her head to pointing at Quinn's, Misty said she was standing behind the couch praying when she felt weak in her legs and instinctively put both hands on the back of the couch to brace herself. Now, the family had two cats who liked to chase each other around, and when her hands were on the back of the couch, one of the cats ran across and startled her, and the gun went off. So that explained why her finger was on the trigger. She was intending on shooting someone, herself, not Quinn. Misty said she stood there in shock for a few moments and realized what happened. She had shot her husband. She realized he was dead. So she put the gun to her head again because at that point, she was going to take her life too. But before she pulled the trigger, she heard one of the twins stirring over the baby monitor, and being the type of person that looked for signs, she said she saw this as a sign. She couldn't leave her kids with no parents. She said she walked around the couch to get to the phone after the gun fired, and she picked up the shell casing after nearly stepping on it. She said at this point it was still warm or hot, so she tossed it and it went just somewhere towards Quinn's body. So that explains why the shell casing was by his head and not his feet, but only sort of, because she was still not admitting that she moved Quinn's head, so it didn't really explain how it ended up under him. Misty said she then couldn't find the phone. It was a cordless phone and it wasn't in the charging cradle. So then she had to look for it to call 911 and eventually found it under the love seat. So that kind of gives an explanation for why there was a delay in calling 911. So like the police probably set up, they were just trying to get her to change the story to fit the evidence, and she fully obliged. At the end of her statement, though, Misty was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. A huge question hanging over this case was why tell the two stories to begin with? Both of them end with the gun being carelessly discharged. So she's telling the truth the second time. Why did she initially lie the first time?
I mean, that first story was not more plausible than the second one. I mean, that one was just way out there. I don't understand. I mean, I guess she thought maybe she would get away with it, but it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Like neither story makes a lot of sense in regards to what happened. So why not just tell the second story first if it's the actual truth? And the police thought that it's pretty obvious why she did this, that both stories were lies, but the suicide one filled in the discrepancies, like the location of the shell and why her finger was on the trigger. But for Misty, the answer was that she didn't want to admit she was suicidal. She was known for being outgoing, friendly, for being that person who had it all together. We know that a fair amount of their debt was from her attempts to keep up with appearances. So admitting she was in a dark place, had a dark moment, had mental health issues, it was more than she could take. And we also have to wonder if religion would play a factor into not wanting to admit she was suicidal. She did believe that a suicide attempt would have her hospitalized and that she thought her children would be taken from her. So she thought she would use a cover story to be able to hide these problems she was having by saying she just slipped and pulled the trigger. Now, I'm not sure that I believe her side of the story, but I just want to put it out there because I do believe in giving both sides of any case. So Misty was arrested for the murder, and she was charged with multiple counts having to do with the church embezzlement. The church didn't want to press these charges. They had already made a deal with the family not to, but a crime is a crime, even if the victim doesn't want to press the charges. So the state can take the victim's feelings into consideration in many cases. They don't have to. And in addition to those charges, Misty had also gotten credit cards in her sister's name. The total charges she eventually pleaded guilty to in all these financial crimes was like 37 counts related to the embezzlement and 3 related to identity theft. She pled guilty for all of those charges in April of 2007. She said to take responsibility for what she did and to avoid putting her loved ones in the position to have to testify against her.
But with a murder trial coming up, she was probably also motivated to settle this one quickly so that she could focus her resources on the bigger case.
I definitely would also make that a similar decision if I was in her shoes. Her attorney did say that he believed the decision to even charge Misty in these financial crimes where neither of the victims, meaning the church or her sister, wanted to press charges, was so that the state could destroy her credibility going into the murder trial. She had made restitution to the church. Her sister didn't want to press the charges. And usually the state will go along with the victims when there's not a complaining witness, but they were, according to her attorney, trying to destroy her credibility. With the plea deal, Misty was sentenced to around 20 years in prison. So let's go ahead and get into the murder case here. Misty was out on bond in the pretrial period, and she was just surrounded by support. Her family, her church family, and even Quinn's family. They all believed her that this was either an accident or possibly involuntary manslaughter, which in North Carolina is defined as a death caused by reckless or negligent actions.
Hmm.
So, Eric, I am curious, knowing that Quinn's family supports Misty and believes she's innocent, if you were a juror, would the victim's family siding with the defense and their claim of innocence sway you at all?
If the victim's family was present when it happened and knew exactly what happened, yeah, I think given the evidence and given the fact that she lied, I don't think that that would have been enough to sway me. How about you?
I think I would take it into account. I wouldn't see it as evidence. I would
Right.
see it as a circumstantial thing happening, but I don't know that it would outweigh any piece of actual evidence.
Yeah.
With the family believing Misty, Quinn's family did support the DA as the family of the victim in January of 2007, and they asked that Misty be given a plea deal, something that she would take. They didn't want her to go to trial and risk getting a life sentence. The DA suggested 7 years, and the family agreed to that. Misty also agreed, so it looked like this was going to be settled, but then the DA rescinded the offer. It turned out there were some people who did not agree, and those were the police departments involved, both the investigating one and the one Quinn worked for. They believed this was murder. They wanted Misty to go to trial, and they wanted her to go to prison for what they believe she did. And it seems like the police not being on board with the plea deal may have been what nixed it, what made why it didn't go through, even though Misty would have taken it. So this case ended up going to trial on the 25th of June, 2007. So what we'll do is I will cover the state's case and Eric will cover the defense case. So the state's case, they had a medical examiner testify that Quinn was shot from no more than 6 inches away. And by tracing the trajectory of the bullet, the detectives were able to recreate the crime scene. They used a mannequin, wooden dowels to mark the trajectory, and a couch. Using these things, they concluded that Misty could not have been standing where she said when the gun went off. Also, due to the blood flow at the scene, a detective testified that Quinn's head would have had to have been repositioned before the police arrived, or else his blood somehow flowed uphill. The implication here is that Misty altered the position of Quinn's head to better match her accidental shooting story. Another point the state tried to make was through playing the 911 call. Well, the first thing Misty said was, "You've got to get out here." She then told that story about bringing the gun to her husband before mentioning that he was shot. The state argued that Misty was more concerned with making sure her story got out there first and her narrative was out there than she was with getting help. There were also police officers who testified to her telling the story about slipping on the book. One said she repeated it to him multiple times and she never varied in any details, pretty much just keeping the story, pretty much just telling the story verbatim. Not something she accidentally shot her husband, came up to, suddenly rehearsed and memorized to tell the police. Sounded like something she had already planned. There were also some holes in Misty's version of events that came out in court. The For instance, the jury was allowed in open court to handle the murder weapon, and they were able to feel the resistance of the trigger and consider if a cat startling someone or even running across their hands would have been enough to cause them to accidentally squeeze hard enough to fire. I mean, anyone who's pulled a trigger on a gun knows that a lot of them are hard to pull, and in this case, it was one that was on the harder side to pull. A firearms instructor demonstrated for the jury how the gun comes out of the holster, which took at least 2 motions. For it to have fallen out of the holster onto the bathroom floor would mean that in addition to leaving his gun loaded on a shelf, Quinn also left it loose in the holster. That would be incredibly irresponsible gun handling, particularly since he had 3 little kids in the home. So, Eric, that was the state's main bullet points. Do you want to get into the defense side of things?
The defense was pretty simple. They stuck by Misty's second statement that this was actually a suicide attempt on her part that, through a series of incidents, went wrong. They agreed that the financial strain was behind this, only they argued that it led Misty to contemplate suicide and not plan a murder. The defense challenged some of the state's findings. A forensic pathologist testified he believed the shot was actually from 2 feet away, not 6 inches. And a psychologist testified that due to Misty's severe depression and anxiety, there was no way Misty in that moment could have formed intent to kill Quinn. Without that element, it wouldn't be first-degree murder. The other major challenge was a demonstration with the mannequin and the couch. The couch that they used was not the couch from the home. And remember how police released the crime scene that evening? A family friend had helped remove the couch the day after Quinn's death. Police learned this when they went to get the couch later as they began questioning Misty's story. The couch wasn't just removed, though. It was broken up using a backhoe to make it easier to dispose of and was at a transfer station waiting for its final journey to the landfill. Police searched 2 truckloads of trash, but they could not find the sofa or any pieces of it in that truck or in those trucks.
Now, I would think that a similar couch would be good enough for the sake of a demonstration, but the defense raised some points about the wear and tear of a couch when which cushions are sagging and which ones were firm could have altered Quinn's position to some degree.
The jury heard Misty's story through her recorded interviews, but Misty did not take the stand in her own defense.
Do you think she should have taken the stand? What do you think?
No, I think that was the right choice. I feel like if she would have taken the stand, she probably would have turned the jury off. Who knows what she would have said.
Yeah, I think personality-wise, she may have done an okay job on the stand, but I think the main issue is whatever she said on direct could open her up to impeachment on cross-examination, and she was she kinda had a track record of being a liar, and she had already lied, to the police and admitted she lied and then came up with this other story. I honestly think she woulda walked off that stand with the jury just thinking she was a liar.
Hmm.
I don't think it could have helped her, but I do think it could have hurt her, so I think she made the right choice not to testify. The jury came back with their verdict on July 16th, 2007. And while it was read, I think visually it's an interesting thing because the police officers, both Quinn's police force and also the ones who investigate the case, were all filling those seats behind the state. But on Misty's side, it was full of his family.
Mm.
And so it's like this dividing line between who in his life believed she was guilty and who didn't. Now, at this point, it was up to the jury, and they found that Misty was guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in jail with no possibility of parole. And I'm wondering if you agree or disagree with the verdict.
I mean, not having been presented with all the evidence that they were presented with, and just from hearing this and reading and researching this, I agree with it. How about you?
I do. I think that Misty told too many lies to believe any of her stories, so you have to only look at the evidence. She's not very credible, and the evidence shows that it was much more likely that he was intentionally shot. Now, I don't think Misty had been planning this for years or months or days. It may have been an impulsive decision when she heard that phone call.
Mhm.
Maybe she even planned this to be a murder-suicide and didn't go ahead with the second half of that. I think there are possibilities here, but I'm just I'm really surprised that his family doesn't think she intentionally shot him, or at least at the time of the trial, they didn't believe that, and as far as I know, they still don't. Now, her attorney thinks that her changing stories were pretty much what got her convicted rather than the evidence. If you change your story once, it means you lied once. And so, it doesn't necessarily mean your second story is not true, but it's a big hurdle to get over, especially when your second story fills in all the holes someone else told you about in your first story. So, like I said, once you lie once, why should I believe your second story? She did appeal, of course. Misty's direct appeal was denied. The main point in this appeal was the demonstration or, quote, experiment, as her defense called it, of the couch and the mannequin. But all three appellate judges agreed that the evidence was properly admitted and that there was no error. I also think, had they found that that was an error, it probably wouldn't have made a difference because I don't think she was convicted based on that one
Mhm.
demonstration. Quinn and Misty's children went and lived with Quinn's family, and at least in her early incarceration, they were visiting her every other Saturday as they were able to.
And because I love Tank, and I'm sure you love Tank, Charlie, and definitely
Yes.
know if our listeners are our listeners, they care about Tank too. I'm going to tell you what happened to him. He, at the time of Quinn's death, was nearing retirement age, and it was decided that it wasn't in his best interest to be assigned to a new handler. So they decided to let him retire early. A fellow police officer and his wife, who was a veterinarian, adopted Tank, and he lived out his golden years running around on a large farm.
So we absolutely have a happy ending for Tank, which happy endings in true crime cases rarely happen. So we always need to highlight them when we do.
Hmm. We love dogs, and I do think that the right outcome happened here. It's a tragic story. I feel terrible for Quinn and Misty's kids because they have a long journey of healing and understanding to endure, and it's not really fair to them that this happened.
Absolutely. I think we always have to remember the co-victims in cases, because even if everybody in Quinn's life believes Misty was wrongfully convicted, they're all still co-victims because Quinn still died and
Quinn
he was
died.
still a victim.
Quinn died, and Misty's in prison. Like nobody
Yeah,
wins in this scenario.
nobody wins.
Well, with that, I
Such a
don't.
lighthearted show we've put together here, Eric.
Yeah, if you want a palate cleanser, definitely go check out Patreon or Apple subscriptions and listen to our small talk because we just kind of go wild and it's fun. But
Yeah.
if you want to be part of the conversation, follow us on social media at Crime Lines and Consequences. and we'll see you next time.